They say history is written by the victors, but in the Wild West, history was usually written by the men who had the most to hide. Go to Fort Sumner, New Mexico today. You will see a grave. You will see a headstone caged in iron because people kept stealing it. It says, William H. Bonney. It says, Billy the Kid. Tour guides will tell you he sleeps there, gunned down at age 21 by Sheriff Pat Garrett. But if you look closer at the records, if you dig into the autopsies that never happened and the coroner's juries that were rigged, that grave starts to look a lot less like a resting place and a lot more like a cover-up. Because in 1950, an old man walked out of the Texas brush with a story that terrified the establishment. He had the scars, he had the memories, and he had a claim that would turn the history books to ash. This is not the story of how Billy the Kid died. This is the story of how he survived. To understand the escape, you first have to understand the man. Who was he, really? He wasn't born a killer. He was born Henry McCarty in the slums of New York City. He was raised by a single mother who died of tuberculosis when he was just 14. Imagine that. 14 years old, standing over your mother's grave in Silver City, New Mexico, completely alone in a world that wanted to chew you up and spit you out. That boy didn't have a choice.
Well, now,
he had to become
what we
hard.
got here.
His first kill wasn't for fun. It was a blacksmith named Windy Cahill in Arizona. Cahill was a bully, a man twice Henry's size who liked to slap the skinny kid around for sport. One day, Cahill threw him to the ground and started pummeling him. Henry pulled a revolver and shot him in the gut. The law called it murder. The people who saw it called it self-defense. But Henry McCarty didn't wait for a trial. He ran. And that is when he learned the most important skill of his life: disappearing. He changed his name to Kid Antrim, then William H. Bonney. He learned to speak fluent Spanish, which earned him the protection of the local Mexican population. To the newspapers, he was a devil. But to the poor families of the territory, he was a Robin Hood. He was polite. He could sing. He danced at the fandangos. And he fought against the corrupt Santa Fe ring that was stealing their land. This loyalty is important because when the entire U.S. Army is hunting you, you don't survive unless the people hide you. And the people loved Billy. But the law eventually caught up. In 1881, he was sitting in the Lincoln County Courthouse, sentenced to hang. The judge, Judge Bristol, looked him in the eye and said, "You will be hanged by the neck until you are dead, dead, dead." Billy looked right back, grinned, and said, "And you can go to hell, hell, hell." He wasn't afraid because he already had a plan. April 28, 1881. This is the moment the legend was cemented. Billy was under death watch by two deputies, James Bell and Bob Ollinger. Ollinger was a sadist. He carried a double-barreled shotgun loaded with 18 buckshot pellets in each barrel. He used to taunt Billy, tapping the barrel against the kid's face, saying, "This is the one that's going to kill you, Billy." That morning, Ollinger went across the street for lunch, leaving Billy alone with Deputy Bell. Billy asked to go to the outhouse. On the way back up the stairs, still in handcuffs and leg irons, Billy made his move. He slipped one hand out of the cuff. He swung the heavy iron around and cracked Bell over the head. Or maybe he wrestled for the gun. The history books argue. But the result was the same. A gunshot rang out. Bell tumbled down the stairs, dead. Ollinger heard the shot across the street. He came running. As he looked up at the courthouse window, he heard a voice from above. "Hello, Bob." It was Billy. He was holding Ollinger's own shotgun. He emptied both barrels into the deputy. Then, he didn't run. Not yet. He walked out onto the balcony. He addressed the crowd. He asked for a file to cut his leg irons. He stole a horse. And he rode out of Lincoln singing a song. That is the man we are dealing with. A man who could escape the impossible. So why do we believe that 3 months later, he simply walked into a dark room and let himself be killed without a fight? Let's go to that night, July 14th, 1881, Fort Sumner. The official story is simple. Sheriff Pat Garrett waits in a dark bedroom. Billy walks in. Garrett shoots him. Case closed. But the details tell a different story. Billy was in Fort Sumner for a reason. He wasn't hunting trouble. He was reportedly there to see Paulita Maxwell, the daughter of the wealthy land baron Pete Maxwell. It was a romance that the Maxwell family despised. They wanted Billy gone. That night, the heat was oppressive. The moon was bright outside, but inside Pete Maxwell's bedroom, it was pitch black. Sheriff Pat Garrett was sitting on the edge of the bed, whispering with Pete Maxwell. Outside on the porch, 2 of Garrett's deputies, Poe and McKinney, were waiting. Suddenly, a figure steps onto the porch. He's small, slender. He's in his stocking feet, no boots, holding a butcher knife to cut some beef for a late dinner. He sees the deputies. He doesn't pull a gun. He steps back. He asks in Spanish, "¿Quién es? ¿Quién es?" Who is it? He backs into the bedroom, into the darkness. Now, pause for a second. If this is the most dangerous outlaw in America, a man who killed Bob Ollinger without blinking, why didn't he shoot the 2 strangers on the porch? Why did he hesitate? He backs into the room and senses someone else. He asks again, "¿Quién es?" 2 shots ring out. One finds its mark. The other hits the headboard. The figure drops. Pat Garrett runs out of the room gasping, "I killed the kid." But almost immediately, things get strange. There was no doctor called to examine the body. There was no photograph taken. In an era where outlaws were propped up in coffins and photographed to claim reward money, like Jesse James or the Dalton Gang, Billy's body was buried before the sun came up the next morning. Why the rush? The local women who prepared the body for burial were sworn to secrecy, but whispers leaked out for years. Some said the man had a beard. Billy couldn't grow a beard. He was just a kid. Some said the body looked too heavy, and crucially, Pat Garrett didn't collect the reward money for months because he struggled to prove it was actually the kid. There is a theory that has persisted for 100 years in New Mexico, that Garrett, terrified and trigger-happy in the dark, shot an innocent drifter, maybe a man named Billy Barlow. Realizing he had murdered an innocent man, and realizing he could claim the $500 reward if he said it was the kid, Garrett and Maxwell conspired to bury the mistake fast. And the real Billy? He heard the shots. He saw the confusion. And he did what he always did. He vanished into the night. For 69 years, the legend grew. Hollywood made movies. Books were written. The kid was dead. Until 1948. An attorney named William Morrison was investigating a different case when he heard rumors of an old man in Hyco, Texas. A man named Oliver Brushy Bill Roberts. The locals said he had a temper. They said he could shoot a coin out of the air. And they said he knew things about the Lincoln County War that weren't in any book. Morrison tracked him down. At first, the old man was coy. He didn't want fame. He didn't want money. But he wanted one thing, a pardon. He told Morrison that back in 1879, Governor Lew Wallace had promised Billy a pardon in exchange for testimony.
I was there.
Billy kept his word. The governor lied. Now, nearly 70 years later, this old man wanted the government to honor the deal. Morrison was skeptical. Everyone claimed to be the kid. But then, Brushy started talking. He didn't just tell stories. He gave data. He described the interior of the Lincoln courthouse in 1881 perfectly, where the gun rack was, how the staircase turned, details that had been remodeled and forgotten decades ago. He named the exact brand of crackers Tunstall carried in his saddlebags. But then he dropped the bombshell. He started talking about the Blackwater skirmish. He mentioned how the bodies of his friends were frozen stiff in the snow, and how they had to drape them over the saddles like rigid logs. This was a gruesome detail that had never been published in the dime novels. It was something only a man who was there would remember. Morrison decided to test him physically. This is where it gets impossible to ignore. Billy the Kid was a map of violence. He had been shot, stabbed, and beaten. Brushy Bill Roberts took off his shirt and showed Morrison the map. He had a scar on his right hip. Matches the wound Billy took from the McSween house fire. He had a scar on his left shoulder. Matches the buckshot wound Billy took from the fight with Buckshot Roberts. He had a scar across his scalp. Matches the pistol whipping Billy took during his arrest. In total, Brushy Bill had 26 separate bullet and knife scars that aligned perfectly with the known injuries of William H. Bonney. Statistically, what are the odds? What are the odds of a random old man in Texas having the exact same history of violence etched into his skin? They brought in the experts. The top facial recognition technology of the era was a simple overlay. They took the famous tintype of Billy, the only authenticated photo we have, and overlaid it with photos of a young Brushy Bill. The facial structure, the ears, the eyes. It was a 93% match. In the world of forensics, that is as close to a positive ID as you get without DNA. But the most chilling piece of evidence wasn't the scars, it was the teeth. Old-timers who knew Billy said he had slightly bucked front teeth, and due to his constant laughing and chewing, his canines were worn in a very specific, jagged way. Brushy Bill opened his mouth. The teeth were identical. Morrison was convinced. He built a case. He prepared a petition for the governor of New Mexico, Thomas Mabry. This brings us to the tragedy of 1950, the showdown that should have rewritten history. Brushy Bill was 90 years old. He had suffered a stroke. He was frail. He walked into the governor's mansion in Santa Fe expecting a private meeting. He expected a lawyer's discussion about a pardon from 1879. Instead, he walked into an ambush. Governor Mabry had invited the entire press corps. Dozens of reporters, photographers with blinding flashbulbs, and historians who had built their careers on the Pat Garrett version of history were packed into the room. It was a circus. They didn't treat him like a witness. They treated him like a sideshow freak. They started shouting questions at him all at once.
Who was your first
What was the name of your first girlfriend? How many cows did Tunstall have? Who shot first? Brushy Bill panicked. The stress triggered a mini stroke right there in the chair. His speech slurred. He got confused. He couldn't remember names he had recited perfectly just days before. The historians laughed. They mocked him. Governor Mabry announced to the press that this man was a fraud and sent him away. Brushy Bill Roberts stumbled out of that room, humiliated. He went back to Hyco, Texas. Less than 4 weeks later, he was dead. His heart gave out. He died without his pardon. He died without his name. But in the years since, the silence has started to break. We realized that the historians in that room had a conflict of interest. If Brushy was real, their books were wrong. If Brushy was real, the state of New Mexico had been selling tickets to a fake grave for 50 years. Modern handwriting analysts have since looked at Brushy's letters and Billy's letters. They found the same unique loops, the same slant, the same grammatical errors. And then there's the grave itself. For decades, researchers have asked to exhume the body in Fort Sumner. A simple DNA test would solve this tomorrow. Compare the remains to Billy's mother, Catherine Antrim, who is buried in Silver City. But the state says no. They say the grave has been washed out by floods. They say the records are lost. They say, let the legend rest. Why? If they are so sure Billy died in 1881, why are they terrified of a DNA test? Maybe because they know what they'll find. Or, more likely, what they won't find. Pat Garrett was a man who needed a win. He needed the reward money. He needed to be the hero who stopped the kid. So he fired into the dark, killed a man, and built a legend on top of a lie. And Henry McCarty? He did what he did best. He saw an opening. He saw a chance to leave the violence behind. He let the world think he was dead, changed his name, and disappeared into the vast Texas plains, living another 70 years while the world chased his ghost. They say Billy the Kid died at 21, but if you look at the scars, the teeth, and the fear in the eyes of the politicians who refused to test the DNA, you start to realize the truth. The kid didn't die in the dark. He died of old age in a warm bed, having pulled off the greatest escape in American history. And somewhere, Pat Garrett is still wondering who exactly he shot that night. Thanks for watching, partners. If you don't mind, give us a like and subscribe. And I guess there's a hype button now that boosts the algorithm, so ring that too. It'll help us make better and more frequent content. And don't forget, till next time, partner, never trust a quiet saloon.